Good morning, good morning, good afternoon to most of you. I hope that you're well since last session. Today, as we previously said, is going to be a more hands-on session. I sent some materials about how to download and some basic uses of Activity Browser, which is the open source software that I will be demonstrating today. There are a lot of other softwares that you can use for LCA. Others are open source, such as OpenLCA as well. But majority are for pay. But I think this is a good starting point because it is quite similar, the interface to a lot of others, and it tends to work quite well once you've downloaded it. So for today, we are gonna since we're gonna do a more practical approach, I thought it would be better to do a case study. So we're gonna sort of repeat the structure of last session, going through the definition of goal, scope, boundaries, maybe revising some of the definitions just to ensure that everything is consolidated, and then go through a hypothetical data collection, as well as the organizing of the life cycle inventory and impact indicator selection, as well as then looking at the results that we would be getting and the reference. And then when I will send the slides at the end of this with some references and resources. I would like to ask you to interact if you can unmute yourselves or if you feel more comfortable sending a message in the chat, that would be great. Because I would like to also hear your thoughts, your reflections on as we go along. Why do you think, do you have any questions, or do you think, or are you like, why didn't we do this? Why did we pick this? These are also great questions, and I think that they will also be very helpful to other students and other participants. So definitely don't be scared to participate. That's what I'm hoping for, to hear your thoughts as well and to get some feedback from you. So the context is we will be looking at two meals within a school in this case in rural Chhattisgarh, India. The reason we picked this is one of our sites, but in this case the location is not as relevant since we're doing a very simplified version. There will be two plates. On the bottom right, you can see what will be more or less the makeup of this plate. So it will be a plate that is mostly consistent of rice, 75 grams. Then onion and tomato will be the vegetables, 20 grams of each. And in this case, we're going to be comparing meat, in this case chicken, and veggie nuggets, and see how that affects emissions. It is also important to know that the fresh produce will be locally sourced and transported by foot. So what would that mean? When it comes to cultivation, is there any differences? And for transportation, would that mean that there is or there isn't emissions? For the meat, we selected chicken, but also just because we chose chicken doesn't, we're saying meat doesn't mean all meats are equal and will have the same results. Just to add a bit more difficulty in this case, we've decided to say that it is sourced from a farm that is 20 kilometers away and will be transported by a van. Veggie nuggets are transported from a similar distance, but in this case, we've selected a different type of transport, a lorry. It is important also to know the capacity in this case. And in this case, we're also going to swap out the cooking fuel, just so you can see how that process would be in the using activity browsers browser. First, we'll do it with liquefied petroleum gas, and then we'll do it with firewood. And then we can discuss what changes we see, why is this important, why we have to keep this in mind. So based on this information, I would like to invite you to tell me what are the phases that you are considering that will be included in this life cycle assessment. Sorry.
In the meanwhile, one of the participant has mentioned, Alexandra, that there is no emissions in transport. It is pertaining to the question that you asked before.
Yes, correct. How can I see? One second, let me just make so I can see the chat. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. There's as for currently, what given all this information, what do you think are the stages that will be discussing or including in this life cycle assessment? Or the ones that we will not or that I have not mentioned? Yes, we're not mentioning waste. In a more in a different scenario, maybe next time we can include waste. What else? What and also use in this case. Um, Maybe if you consider the preparation use, there's here the debate: is the cooking manufacturing or use? That is just that is not as important, but sometimes it's good to do these exercises to see what is most what to consider or not. But what we know is that in this case, raw extraction, which would be cultivation, as well as all the energy and the processing that, for example, the rice will have to undergo, and the vegetable nuggets, and then the preparation of the food. We will also not be considering things like the production of the plates or the utensils. This is also important to always ask questions like this because we don't know what is expected of us and what is it that we're aiming. In this case, we're simply looking at the food that will be prepared. One second, sorry. So, um, how would we define the goal? What is the goal of the LCA we're currently executing? And similarly, we need to know the scope, the geographical location. Has that been mentioned? The life cycle stages, as well as what will be the products we will be considering, and if there are any co-products that might occur or not. As also, what do you think is in this case the most appropriate or sensible functional unit to compare both meals? So let's start with the goal. What is the objective?
You can also unmute yourself and speak or put it in the chat wherever you feel it's comfortable.
Anyone? Okay. The goal in this case is to understand the environmental impact of each of the meals, in this case with meat and with vegetable nuggets, and not only get the results of the environmental impact, but also how do they compare and what are the differences. Geographical location, as we've discussed, is a rural part of Chhattisgarh. It is a bigger boundary. It's not just one location because some things are brought from 20 kilometers away. Still reasonable geographical location. Services that might occur: transport, cooking, cultivation, so on. Life cycle stages, as we've previously mentioned, cultivation, any further manufacturing or treatment of certain products to achieve food, as well as cooking. In this case, we'll be looking at. So what would be an appropriate functional unit given the current set out goal and the location and stages? Per meal, yes. And as we've seen in the previous slide, we have the information of what would make up a school meal. So that is good. We have the necessary information, and we have now a functional unit to compare these. Yeah. So here's just all of that for your future reference in on paper written down, so you can then try to do it by yourselves. Also, other things that we need to consider besides the ingredients I've already named is water for cooking, which will be in this case 150 milliliters of water, and we'll also include 5 grams of rapeseed oil just for cooking. In reality, there would be probably spices, salt, and so on, but for simplicity, we'll keep it to these ingredients for now. Although we will not be going into detail about this today on how to make this in Activity Browser, it is important for us to assess the main products which we have: tomato, rice, onion, and meat or vegetable nuggets. But in the case of rice, it is quite interesting because when you are sending the rice to the mill, you send in paddy rice, but you need to treat it in order to remove the husk, the straw, the bran, etc. And that means you end up with this percentage that I have of the screen, approximately. This might change by type of rice or treatment. So the resulting product is only 62% of the initial weight is actual rice. The rest is co-products or byproducts. What is the difference between co-products or byproducts? This is something that we discussed last session. Co-product is another product that occurs from the same process, but that we can profit of, we can sell for another process. Byproduct is that we can use it for another process, but there is no economic value in this case. So in this case, what we do know is that the straw is used for cattle. So it would be, what would it be? Co-product or byproduct? Yes, per school would also be useful, but we don't know the number of students at this point. So in this case, it's better per meals. And also, if we did by school, we would need to find two schools with similar proportions or with similar of vegetarians and non-vegetarians, as well as if we were comparing two schools, we would need to compare two schools of similar size as to not penalize the bigger school. So straw, husk, and bran would all be co-products, unless, for example, straw, they just give it away, then that would be a byproduct. Dust is simply waste. And in this case, it is also important, we'll be including the waste of this process. They'll just be dumped. Also here on onion and tomato cultivation will be based on secondary data, sorry, as well as meat. All of this will be secondary data, except for rice, which we have, which will be from data collection examples that I will provide. And also, we could assume if we are gonna put waste that 10 grams of food scraps of food becomes scraps. What we don't know is what happens to it, if it's maybe composted or if it's thrown away. We don't know this information yet. So going back to the previous session, now that we have the goal, we understand the context of what we want to do, we understand what the objectives are, what is our unit of comparison. How would we go about data collection? Primary data is usually collected via surveys, And since there are several stages that the product goes over its life cycle, the stages that goes over its life cycle, there will be several stakeholders at each case that is in charge or participates in each process. So for each stakeholder, we would have to prepare a questionnaire with information that we know that we'll need. Here to the right, we have a excerpt from a questionnaire that is on fertilizer and chemical consumption for cultivation. So we don't only need to know what type of fertilizer, but also the amount. In this case, we chose kilograms per acre, but we can do per hectare. The reason why we chose this is because what is usually easiest for farmers to use as a metric. Also, it is important to know how is it applied, because if it's applied by machine or by hand, that's also something to consider and that may impact. In the case that it is a machine, then we need to know what is the fuel consumption and fuel consumed, and also the frequency, because not for all cultivation cycles you might use different application rates, and in not all locations you use the exact same approach to fertilizers. So these are all things that will give you a better view and that will help you in the preparation of your life cycle inventory. In the case you cannot collect primary data, or for other reasons you've decided to go with secondary data, there are a variety of sources such as specialized databases. FAO is quite good for things like this if you want a more general overview. And also, oftentimes you can find life cycle articles of something that is similar, but maybe a slightly different setting. Or, for example, here we're looking at all the at more stages. So we might only encounter secondary data for the cultivation of tomato, not the transport. But that we will see as we go through data collection. So this is an example of the article about tomato cultivation I sent after the first session or before the first session, I believe. So this is what secondary data might look like in an article. You can see you first have to be careful when selecting secondary data that it suits your needs, has similar or same objective preferably, that it is in a similar location. This is based in northern India, which is not probably there's if it were in the same state that would be ideal, but it is the closest we can find. It has listed out the activities, and then also in this case we're only going to be using conventional as well as good for that the unit is laid out. Oftentimes in secondary data, it is good to look at the supplementary data. Supplementary data usually has a lot more detail, and especially for the type of data collection and things like that, that will help us in filling in the gaps that we might not find it here. But it is always good for practice if you find a paper that you're interested in to copy their procedure and their life cycle inventory and see if your results are the same or different. And if they're different, see where you might have made a mistake, and also, or maybe you're using a different databases to see what things might affect your results. So as we discussed, lifecycle inventory is just has to be quite detailed compilation of everything that goes in and out, as well as the uncertainty. If you want to do an uncertainty analysis, which in a case where you're maybe collecting from, let's say, 100 different farms, obviously they're not going to have the exact same formula for fertilizer, so you want to account for that variation, and that will give you a far more detailed point of view and more nuance to your results interpretation. I shared with you an Excel that is the LCI that we'll be using today. So you can then, after the session, do it yourselves, or just take a look at it in more detail. Here I'm just showing the cultivation of rice. So as you can see, the output is, it is important to say that this is an output per acre, not per hectare. So please do consider that, as well as all the inputs. All the inputs are per hectare. As you can see, some of the numbers, if you look at rice production on basmati, it is minus 2,405 and 94. This is because there is no straw in this case. So we are using a similar product that will have better results for us. Bran, another waste that is more similar, then we can use the bio waste because it is composted and it is not, whereas rice production on basmati is straw and its byproducts, co-products that are then sold off. So we cannot assume that they're being composted or anything like that. So this is the best. This was the best approach. Other things that we need to consider: rice seed production is another thing that is important to consider in rice. Is if you have a paddy nursery on site, because then this will change. You will include this section. Here we assume that it was not included. So we just included the rice. We did it from the database. All the different types of fertilizer and pesticides. They also used manure. It was applied by a field sprayer. Plowing is also considered. This is particularly interesting for things like land use, as well as the diesel that is burned through the agricultural machinery. The water pump, we've assumed that not everything is used electric water pump. There's also a diesel water pump. And in the irrigation, this is the amount of water that was used per hectare, as well as another nutrient at the bottom. So now that we've compiled, this is just an example. The full will go now through the full LCI when we start setting things up. Now we need to think what are our objectives, what we want to see, what would be the impact indicators that are most interesting to us, and why. Do you have any ideas of what might be useful to compare the sustainability of two meals? You can use either any from the endpoints or midpoints, that is up to you from the screen. Human toxicity, would that be one? Could be. If you were looking especially also at damage to human health, but it depends. Climate change is always a good one to get an overview, as it does measure greenhouse gases, and it is what is most commonly used. So I think most of the time it is a safe bet to include climate change. But since let's think about the process. In the cultivation, we use a lot of fertilizers, chemicals. We're using land. We're using water and other sorts of resources. Is this also something that is important to us, especially in India? What are the main what are main environmental and ecological problems that we might encounter from cultivation? Because transportation and cooking is mostly covered by climate change, since those are airborne emissions. But there's also land emissions and there's water emissions. So what could we use to account for that? Land use or resource depletion. Resource depletion, in this case, we would be referring to fossil fuels, not mineral depletion. So yeah, in this case, fossil fuel depletion. Land use could be very interesting. Water consumption is another that would be good. And then terrestrial acidification, just to understand the health of the soil, that could be another good way to understand and to guarantee long-lasting soil health. Yeah. And also, what is good about this graph when you are doing it yourselves is you can see how the midpoints feed into endpoints. Maybe on this one not so much, but you can see if you select these midpoints, what can you argue that are the main effects? Damage to ecosystem, resource scarcity, damage to human health, and this will also help you decide what are the impact categories that serve your purpose the most. Maybe for you as public health researchers, it is more important to focus on human health and also access to resources such as water, which is essential. Maybe for me as an LCA expert, human health could be analyzed using literature is not the main focus that we have, unless it is the focus of our problem. Maybe natural environment is more of an objective that we would like to meet. In this case, just to cover a bit of everything, out of all the impact indicators, we will be doing a global warming potential for 100 years. This is important to say for how many years because greenhouse gases live for different amounts of time in the atmosphere. The usual amount is 100, but don't be surprised if you can see 50 or even 5 or even 200. That is also normal. It is just important for you to be clear about this and also to account for how this might be impacting your results. I also chose terrestrial acidification just for soil health. I thought it would be interesting to look into. And then water consumption. I think it is always important, especially when looking at a public health perspective. Access to water is essential to avoid a variety of long-term disease, so we also want to see that. And also when selecting, if we were proposing more sustainable alternative, let's say to rice, we're proposing millet or a different grain. We would also be wanting to see not only the emissions, but also are you using more water, are you using more resources in order to produce the same amount? These are all important things to consider when we are making these sort of recommendations. There's no one size fits all. It is important to know your problem in depth, and it is important to always think it through, ask colleagues, ask people who are in the same project but with a different perspective. They might give you ideas that may not have occurred to you. This is more than normal, and you might end up tweaking the impact indicators that you've selected. That is also completely normal. What is most important is that you are self-critical of your own decisions, that you ask other people, and that you reflect if they're meeting your original goals or not. And if your goals have changed, how can we adapt them to the rest? So now we're gonna go. I'm going to show you how to set up a life cycle assessment. So the way you would go about it, once you've downloaded, you have the databases. Just to give you a quick navigation project is where you have your databases and you can make a new database. I would recommend that the databases you have downloaded, you don't change them ever just to avoid having problems down the line. And then you can copy any products that you might need, and then you can tweak it to your liking. Here I've made a variety of different products based on literature and primary data. And also you put transport and preparation and stages. So for example, preparation, in this case, we could put the LPG, or we could use the firewood. But if we go to impact categories, there's an overwhelming list. Today, and most of the time, if you're going to be using recipe, this is also something you have to decide before you do, because it's up to you. There's no right or wrong answer. It just has to make sense for your problem. In our case, we are going to use one of the most commonly used in both academia and private sector, which is a recipe. Midpoint categories, because it is more specific, it gives you more granularity as each metric deals with one specific environmental problem or resource problem or health problem. And as you can see, there's in parentheses, there's different letters. In this case, we'll choose hierarchist. I have no answer to why that is the name, but just so you know, that is the cultural interpretation because it is assuming how intense, resource intensive will be making things, if we'll be trying to be more efficient or not. And also land use will have a lot of effects on that. So it gives you a different, either a more conservative or a more extreme estimation. H is right in the middle, so it is why we use it. So it can give us a accurate description. So here we have global warming we've decided upon, and so on. But for now, we'll be looking at our products. Let's say we want to, what we need to get, what do we need rice. Okay, so we'll go to rice production. The way we'd go at rice production is we would first put in the name and then this will always appear. So you need to change the outcome. So if our product is 1 acre of rice cultivated, what will be the output of rice? This is based on the life cycle inventory. So as you can see here in the life cycle inventory, the output is 2030.34. And here we have all the inputs. How do we select the activity before we go to activity browser? Most of the time we look at databases, in this case EcoInvent, or there's other databases. If it is something that is very specific, for example, for me, firewood was not available in this EcoInvent version. I had to make it myself from literature. So in this case, I just went about looking at, for example, carbon dioxide from soil or so on, whatever is interesting to me. It is also important when you're looking at the emissions, what sort it is, if it's air, soil, also a natural resource. And in air pollution, there's also location. If it's in rural areas, peri-urban, urban areas, and the long-term estimates, or if you're looking at the short-term impacts. These are all important things to consider. But for now, we'll be just working with EcoInvent. So we go back to our LCI. We know what we want to use. We have here cultivation, harvesting. We won't be looking into other aspects in this case, just to keep it simple. But we would also include milling and so on. But I don't want to prolong it because it's just repetition of the same structure. So once you've looked at your primary data, you might have 20 stakeholders. What you would do is you would do the average of that. And then if you were also looking at the uncertainty, you do the standard deviation. Sometimes there might be in the standard deviation, it might be bigger than the average because of the variation. That means you have to get rid of the outliers. That you would need to include in your methodology. But in this case, we'll just be looking at inputs. So here we have all the inputs and you'd be, for example, we want to look at urea. So we would go to EcoInvent. We type in urea. And also it's important for us to see the location. We always want to start as precise as we can. I selected the location India. IN is the code. That does not exist. So Asia usually is not available. So in this case, we'll do rest of the world. Rest of the world usually implies that it is outside of Europe and Western countries. This is because majority of data collection takes place in Europe primarily. Also in the US is quite common. And this is also something for you to be aware of and acknowledge as a sensitivity, but try to avoid it as much as possible. So what is the difference between urea production and market for urea? Because both have the same name. If you know the exact way it was fabricated, and it matches the description in urea production, then I would recommend you pick it. Here you have the full description, and it is based on literature. As you can tell, this is based on European fertilizers. If you're unsure, or it is not very specific, or there's a variety of ways that the urea you are using was produced, then I recommend you go with market for urea. This applies for any product. Majority have a urea production version and a market for the product version. If you're uncertain, it is better you go for market because it gives you a better estimate, as it does an estimate of various countries. Here you can see that the location varies. So we're looking at 1 acre of rice. So we've decided we're gonna go with urea, market for urea. We know the unit matches to our LCI. Where's urea? Market for urea, kilogram, perfect. And kilogram here it says 66.38. So we would just drag it. And then it will appear at the bottom. The more things you've included, the more it will take to load. Also, it's important that you have edit activity on. I also recommend, in this case, I don't have comments myself, but I usually try to have a comment section just to remember what I did, just to keep some references that I've used. You can also include uncertainty here. Uncertainty, you can modify it to match. Usually, I end up using normal uncertainty because of the type of statistical analysis we do. Here you put the average value and see what the effect would be. Or if it is undefined, that's just gonna give you a more moderate estimate. So we had 66.38. Or if we can put it in. Just press enter afterwards. Make sure that it matches up. But as we can see, we've already put urea. So in this case, we'd want to delete it. You right click, you delete, that is fine. Delete exchange, not delete formula. And then if you wanted more specific information, like because of the location, there's particular set of emissions, then you go here, look for the emission that you're interested in, and same approach. You just drag it and put the exact amount. In this case, that is not interesting to us. This is not pertinent. But yeah. But what happens if you have two types of rice? You could do it by hand all over again, or to avoid making mistakes and to make your life easier, you can duplicate the activity or to a new location if you want to do another, or to a different database, depends on what you want to do. Here, we'll just duplicate it here. We go to the duplicated version, edit activity. Let's say it's a different type of rice and the production is high. It's 2050. It doesn't seem like much more, but we'll see if this has an impact. So for right now, let's just compare the two rices we've made. We want to go make a new setup. Here, you press setup, new rice comparison. And we need to find a way to change the name so to differentiate more. I'll put more rice. Now we have two different products, so we can go back to the setup, we can tell them apart. We'll compare just 1 kilogram just to see how that has impacted our results, and if we made any mistakes, maybe this would be good. Here we're only gonna look at global warming potential because we're trying to do it quickly. You can either look at it by impact category. If you had others, this would be a drop-down list, or you do an overview. Overview gives you the results. As expected, if there's more rice produced with the same inputs, it will have a lower impact. Here, the difference is not very important, but this is just an example. And here, this is the plot up there. But what mainly you end up using is the table. The table, which then you can export to Excel or to another software to make it more visible. Okay, now this was just the example of how to set it up. We want to do now the meals. The meals I've already input all the parts. So here I showed you rice. Then there's tomato per acre. This is the output from the literature. Here in the comments, you should do as I say, not as I do. You should put the reference, just in case afterwards you need to consult that, just to make sure. Same with onion, and in this case also soya nuggets. You will have to include. So now you've first made all your LCIs. Now that you have that cleared up, then you can go to Activity Browser. You input it all into activity details. You go to your project, the database you made. You have all the products that are interesting to you that you want to participate. So you have rice, you have tomato, so on. You want to make a meal. How would you go about that? Right click, new activity. Example, yeah. It will give you a new product, 1 unit. If it were 1 kilogram of meal, then you'd have to specify. You can change the unit. That is not a problem. Well, it is if you don't press edit activity. Press it here. So you want to include rice. First, make sure you have the technosphere rice. What else do we need? Tomato. Vegetable oil. And you can also look. Let's make this one with nuggets, with the non-meat version. Perfect. So in this case, we'll also be using water. Location here is important, so we'll look at India. Tap water, let's see. Since we're not sure what was the treatment, we go for market water. So if you, for example, had in your LCI liters of water, you'd have to convert it to kilogram, because this you cannot change since it's from the database and you don't want to change it. It's better to adapt the primary data to match this. So as we said, the rice was 75 grams of rice, 20 grams of tomato, 5 grams of vegetable oil, well, rapeseed oil, onion again, 20 grams, and 30 for the meat substitute for tap water. Let's assume a kilogram of water is 1 liter, so it would be 15 kilograms. So yeah, so that's one meal. Now you've set it all up. You need to check that it matches. Again, you'd go again to your project. They all have the same unit. If you're gonna compare, this is important for you to check. Let's see. Okay, let's see. You want to check this. You right click and then you press open. Here, as you can see, we've only included the products. We haven't included water or oil. Let's go back to the setup, see with, again, same problem. Here we have chicken. Okay. Now we have all the impact categories that we're discussing before. Press calculate. As we can see, the example meal, just do the overview so we can see better. The example meal has slightly larger impact than the other meal without meat. This is because we've included oil, but still significantly lower than the one with meat. So these are just the net results, which is the final results. Now we want to see what are the specific products that are driving up the environmental impact. So here, there's several ways to look at it. This is elementary flow contributions. This is just the type of emission. As you can see, the different types of carbon dioxide from soil or biomass, from fossil. This is important also if you're trying to look at the contributions from soil or from a specific category. You can unite them just by name, type, unit, whatever you like. Let's keep it to name. So here is a more simplified version. So we can see methane derived from fossil fuels, a lot of carbon dioxide derived from fossil fuels, considerable amount from biomass. Also here it is important to see how you're visualizing it. This is relative, so all of them are having the same results, which is not true, as we know from these results. They have different results, so we need to keep this in mind. If we want to visualize with the difference of results, we can put absolute. That is fine, and we can also look at the other metrics, the impact categories. But most of the time, what we're interested in is the specific contributions of each product. Here, you have to tweak it to your liking. Most of the time, again, you will be looking at the table because, as you will realize, this is quite overwhelming, and most of the time, it's not even easy to read. So let's say you can either do it by percentage, the cutoff percentage, or you can do by the top, let's say, 10 emission contributing factors. Why is straw negative? Why did we put it in negative in LCI? This is because it is a co-product. You don't use it for this process. You sell it and it's used in a different process. So sort of you discount those emissions. That is important also for you to see to make sure that has added up. Grassland, crop, bio-waste is important here. Land tenure, chicken for slaughtering. Again, you need to make sure that it matches what you want. Let's make it absolute. Here we can see the contributions change. And here you will have the table. The table you can, you can export the plot. I don't usually recommend this. I say you rather make it your own. You can either just copy it. You copy it to your liking. You have here all the information. It's even better for safekeeping rather than keeping it on the database. And then you can make it into whatever graph you want. Again, you can aggregate by reference product. So that would be the source. Because, for example, electricity is made up from a different variety of different types of electricity. So from fossil fuels, from solar, so on. So yeah, so you can look at it that way. This one is just by the exact product. So it would be chicken, onion. You can see what the effects are. As you can see, onion is unexpectedly high. Soya nuggets is understandable. Tomato is also reasonable. Vegetable oil, that's a high, yeah, that would make sense. Where's the rice? Rice, yeah, rice throughout, it makes sense. Another way to look at the composition of the emissions would be through the Sankey diagram. This is mainly good for you to visualize. I think it can be a bit clunky sometimes, but it is useful to have it. As you can see here is just one meal at a time and one impact indicator at a time, so you cannot compare. But let's say you don't understand the contributions of the example meal. Then you go to the Sankey example meal. We want to look at the global warming potential. Here you have to be careful because sometimes it doesn't change. So you would need to refresh and calculate just to make sure that it's updated. Here you can see the exact percentages. That's also quite good, although you can also get those from the table. Here there's always the table and you can always copy it. Yeah. Going back to the Sankey, you can have this. So why is this important? We've seen all of these things. Why would we want to know these details? How would they help us? To decide what product has the largest impact, to see if the switch we made, let's say from meat to soya nuggets, is it good or not? To understand if cooking, here we did not include cooking, so we have to include it. So we'd go back to activity details. Let's compare meal with meat. We'll make it with LPG. Okay, market for petroleum gas. An example meal. Let's add the same. So now we can see that it's clearly bigger, the difference. We'll delete the meal without meat in this case because it's pretty similar. We'll redo it. Just having two is just going to be a bit easier for comparison. Go into the overview. Interestingly, for example, you can see here global warming potential is similar, but all the other metrics without meat has better impacts. So now we would go into process contributions. Compare reference flow by global warming potential. We can see that natural gas is the main leading cause for this. There is a lot of natural gas, liquefied petroleum gas. This is all related to the same. You like to aggregate by reference product. Yeah, natural gas is a large component here. So this would help you in deciding what to focus on in your discussion, finding literature as to why is this the case, and to see the trade-offs. For example, as you can see, the trade-offs change, and in acidification, it is actually a fertilizer or a chemical used that has the largest impact. Whereas in water consumption, in water consumption, it is rice or maize. Why do we have maize in the meat? That is another thing, like you would need to look at the literature. It is because of the feed of the meat that has the largest impact. So again, this is relative. So here you'd want to go absolute just to get a better understanding, because it does change how things look. And so on. A lot of it is related to the feed for the animals here in the meal with meat. So these are things that may be more effective meat feed, or maybe reducing the amount of meat, things like this that would make the most sense. Also, I know this is very overwhelming, so yeah. So definitely look back on the videos and please do ask questions. And yeah, and there's a lot of resources online as well that might be even even more useful at explaining how to do step by step the LCAs. So don't be afraid to use YouTube. There's a lot of good resources there. And yeah, and thank you everyone. I hope you
Yeah,
have a
thank you
good evening.